And we are live. Excellent. Thanks for joining us once again. I'm Sammy K. Powers, and this is the PHP Roundtable. This is a live podcast of developers discussing topics that PHP nerds care about. And the ultimate goal of this little podcast is to learn something from one another. Hopefully we can learn from one another. And if you're listening live and you want to be a little part of this shindig, send a tweet to the PHP Roundtable or at PHP Roundtable with a question, and we will try to get your question addressed or comment addressed on the show live if we can. So what are we talking about? There are two seemingly contradictory kind of philosophies out there about how we can charge clients for our programming work. When we work on a project with a client, how do you charge them? Do you charge them the hourly rate or the value-based way? So we're going to figure out what that means. What is value-based pricing? We're going to talk about it. Today we have a couple people on the panel who are going to be helping us understand these concepts. And in no particular order, we're going to start off with Keith Casey, who is a former contract developer, now solving API problems with Okta. Welcome, Keith.
Hey, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for joining. Also have Tim Lytle, not Little, retired contract developer who works at Nexmo as a developer advocate and API designer. Welcome, Tim.
Hey.
Who just tweeted, I have no idea what I'm doing here, and then he sent a link to the live discussion, so I'm going to like it as the PHP Roundtable. And we also have Mike McDerment, who is the co-founder and CEO of FreshBooks and author of Breaking the Time Barrier, which is a book about value-based pricing. Welcome, Mike.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking the time here. And his official name on the Hangouts is Carly. So if I accidentally call Mike Carly, that's why. So let's kick off with just sort of maybe just kind of looking at a concept of what we're kind of familiar with maybe as freelance contractors, and that is how we bill our clients maybe based on our hours. We're maybe used to getting a quote or getting a quote to a client saying, okay, I think it's going to take me this many hours and therefore it's going to be this amount of money. Does anybody have any particular thoughts on this model and why it's how it's good and how it's bad, and where this might kind of lead us down the path to pursue something called value-based pricing?
I could probably comment on how at least how it worked for me for 10 or so years. With one quick change to what you said is I would go to a client and not say, this is how many hours I think it's going to take, so this is what it's going to cost. I would say, this is how many hours I think it's going to take, so does that fit within your budget? Because I wouldn't bill them for my estimate, I would bill them for my actual time. Meaning everything that I did was very flexible, and because I tended to work with clients that were either building some type of prototype, maybe because they were a startup, maybe it was just a new idea they wanted to prove, or even in larger scale organizations, it was something that they didn't know if it would work or not, so they wanted to be able to rapidly make changes and prove out an idea. So it was something that, for me, hourly based pricing allowed me to be very flexible and not have to get tied down with a lot of quotes on the front end, and we could change the project as it went on. There was no real restrictions based on some estimate or some proposal that had to be followed.
I might go a little theoretical here for a second. So used to bill by the hour and even just like come up with project costs like you outlined, Sammy. And I actually built FreshBooks to bill my clients. And along the way of running that agency and billing in that way, I came to realize that, pricing is a funny thing. And so when you just take your time and you hang a number of hours and a rate on things, it's not necessarily the best way to go for a couple reasons. One is, ultimately, what we do is each of us, we offer value to our clients. Like we're solving some kind of a problem. And so to my mind, the value and what is value is entirely determined by your client. And so understanding how valuable a project is then kind of leads to like how much you should charge for it. And so for one organization, fixing a bug, if it's a major security hole, even if it takes you like an hour, it could be worth like $1 million, right? And so because you have those skills, and you should understand that implication. and don't charge, $100 if that's your hourly rate, charge something, in line with the actual value. So maybe I'll just stop there. I could keep going, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, my big annoyance with it was always the reporting that went along with it. Is you need to track the time, you need to you need to keep track of emails, and then there's this question of, okay, well, you billed for 10 hours this week. Okay, well, was that 10 productive hours, or was that 10 hours of emails, and then 4 hours of actual development? And I think that was always one of the most painful pieces about hourly based pricing for me, is that it has no connection to actually solving the problem.
Yeah. If I could just go to the second point, because I think that I was going to get into, but I wanted to not hear myself talk so much. But I'll go there now. Is actually billing by the hour. It's my opinion that it actually pits you against your client, right? Because your incentives are actually the opposite. So for you want to bill as many hours as you can, right? Because that's how you make money. And for your client, they want you to bill for as few as they can. And so when you use that as the unit of measure, you're actually setting yourselves up as like opposing parties. And, I just like my work so much better and my life so much better when I'm on the same side as all the people I work with. And so when you switch to value, it's like we determine what a value is up front, and then I just go and make it work, and no one's counting hours or tracking what kind of quality it was. Like, you got your answer, you're happy to pay for it because you knew what it was worth. So that's the approach I like to take.
And I think you make some really good points about kind of setting yourself at odds with the client when you're doing hourly. And I've also noticed that as your skill becomes maybe more efficient, you get penalized by that. Like you're able to do things a lot faster and you make less money, and the client profits from that.
Well, and think of it from customer to customer. If you've got a customer and you think this is going to take a day of work, and you're billing hourly, and that takes you 2 hours, not only are you penalized there, but now what do? Do you go and try and find another customer to fill the other 6 hours to help you sort of make up what you were expecting to earn, but now you haven't? And it puts you in this thing where you're always hunting for the next thing, and it's not only mismatched motivations, it's just a broken system, I think.
But that can be a question less of value versus hourly, as more of a question of what's your resolution of time.
Mm-hmm.
If you're saying, I'm going to charge by the day, whether it takes 2 hours or 4 hours, it's, because of context switching, because of, the cost involved in that, I'm going to bill at a very, a larger resolution. I mean, you can solve that same problem that way. I mean, I think in some of this is also, it goes to, at least in my experience, I never had a client want to know, oh, you billed 10 hours. Was that productive hours or not? I never had that problem.
Right.
And I use other tools to manage the tracking and all that. So that wasn't a headache for me. It was at first. But once I found tools to take care of that, I didn't have a problem with that. And I was generally in demand enough that if I was done with one client, I didn't need to say, oh man, I wish that took more hours, because I had another project that was sitting on the back burner. Somebody was waiting for me to be able to start theirs.
Right. Well, and I found one of the things that helped me a few years ago is I read some stuff by Patrick McKinsey on Hacker News. And he started talking about hourly is broken, but time-based is still a challenge. Like, going to straight value-based is a challenge. So if you just change a resolution to day or week, that makes you think about things differently. So I did, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago now, I switched to daily pricing and with half-day resolution. So I'd round off to the nearest half day. But then the estimate and the timeline and everything was always set in per days. And then I would dedicate and say, these are the days I'm working on your project. Here are the blocks that I'm waiting for, that are the blockers that you have. And this day is set aside and you're being charged for it regardless.
So we kind of jumped in and kind of talked about more value-based versus hourly and some benefits. Maybe we should back up just a little bit, just for those who have not ever heard of this concept of value-based pricing. What is value-based pricing, just sort of at the core level? Mike, do you want to take that one?
I'll try and take a stab at it here. Like, what I would say is, instead of charging for time and units as sort of traditionally done, or even just saying, like, there's a couple of ways. Sometimes people will price like brochureware, like this is what it costs us to build a website. or this is how many hours. Instead of doing that, what value-based billing is about is understanding the problem your client's trying to solve. So like kind of gathering some information, determining whether you can actually help them solve that. And if you can, trying to understand like what is the value of solving that problem in their eyes, and then hanging a price on that that's some effectively percentage or of solving that problem. So it's reflective of the value they're actually going to get at the end of the day. Does that make sense? So it takes a little more work up front to kind of do that in some cases called like discovery or whatever it is, but to like, invest in getting to know your customer and their objectives. But then you can actually, you can actually start to divorce the time you spend on things from what you earn, which is actually, kind of the long-term benefit if you're working with the right kind of clients. And also it has some benefits, not to drone on here, but benefits like, your customer actually gets price certainty because you took the time to understand the problem and you said, listen, it's going to cost me $30,000 to solve this. And we'll have that done in 4 months. And, by virtue of that, they're like, okay, $30,000, roughly 4 months. I understand that because I can get my problem solved, and that is what I'm paying for. Anyways, I hope that makes sense. But yeah.
Well, I think the discovery piece, it's not only doesn't help you understand the problem, but helping you understand the importance to them. Because when you are waiting on them to do something or to get information to you or something like that, you know that if this is a low priority for them, you need to plan accordingly. But if this is high priority and this is keeping them up at night right now, then you can go ahead and say, well, odds are they're going to be faster with responses, they're going to be more anxious, and you can factor that into your timeline and your scheduling and your price. And just knowing how important it is I think, fundamental in general, not just valuable, but urgent.
Yeah. So, Mike, you in your book, I think you make an allusion. You allude to the idea that to the client, the value-based model is more about investing than expensing whatever it is that you're doing for them, right?
Yeah, I think, fundamentally my approach to some of this stuff, and by the way, I'll give a little plug for the book. It's an hour read. It's free online. Just search Breaking the Time Barrier. And it's about helping you learn how to think about this, because it's hard to make the transition if you've been billing clients one way for a long time. So it's like a primer. But having said that, I think it's about building a partnership and being on the same side. And yeah, you want your clients to look at you as if they're investing in their business and getting problems solved, as opposed to you just being a cost that it's like, oh, here comes another $20,000, right? Like if you're doing it right, it's like, I just invested $20,000 in my business with I don't know, Sarah's help. And this is what we get, right? Sarah's doing a great job with value-based pricing versus, hey, I got to spend $20,000 on this person. It's a very different mindset. So I don't know. Hopefully that gets at what you were looking for.
Absolutely. So with value-based pricing, when you approach a client with sort of this model that like, okay, this is going to be giving you this much return on investment and things like that, and this is how much it's going to cost to invest in this to really achieve this. If you don't have, even during the discovery phase, if you have like a project that is kind of untested and you don't really know where the numbers are going to be or where they're going to land, and it's sort of like this, a lot of question marks and unknowns, is value-based pricing still a good model to follow, or should you fall back to hourly until you know all those things?
Couple ways to think about things. I think you got to think about how big is the end project sort of worth. Is it worth you spending a lot of time? Like you may choose to spend like a month of your life doing discovery on a project and helping a client sort through this thing, because it's going to be like 3 years worth of work, right? And so that 1 month upfront investment, which you may not even charge them for, you get to know each other well, is going to lead to a $400,000 project, right? You can sort of, you'll really enjoy, and all the rest of it. So I think there's no kind of perfect answer. Alternatively, you could say, hey, listen, like a project, maybe there's value in having somebody like work through it with you to understand, what some of the risks and concerns are. And I'll give you, like a bit of a roadmap or a minefield at the end of it, and you can take it and go find another vendor if you want. But I don't want to start this project until there's more, sort of constraints established. invariably, if they actually say yes to that, they will end up going with you because that's your opportunity to build rapport and ask the questions and all that good stuff. It's also a great opportunity on a project that long as well to figure out, do I want to work with these people? Right? Because let's face it, not every client is created equal, and maybe they're nice people, but they have no urgency around this and no ability to get the budget or what have you, as sort of indicated elsewhere. And better for you to figure that out up front before you sort of clear your schedule for the next 1 to 3 months or something like that.
Yeah. Speaking of that, is there any smells or red flags that you can kind of see ahead of time for a client that just says these clients are probably not going to be the ones who I'm going to gel well with, especially when it comes to they're focusing so much on like how much is this going to cost me, how cheaply can we get this done? Is there really a problem when the budget becomes too much of an issue?
I think those though are not code smells, client smells. Yeah. Regardless of your billing model. I mean, that's the same. I've always been hourly, and that's as soon as I have someone who wants to know, oh well, can we do this for less, or here's the budget that we can't go over. I'm like, well, that's not even close to what it's going to cost. You've unrealistic expectations. Regardless of your billing model, that's those are issues. I think kind of where my perspective comes from is when I was a contractor, I made a lot of the companies, the projects that I worked on were people who were just trying out a new idea. So the value was very unknown. It wasn't that the project was unknown. It was that the value was unknown because it wasn't going to depend necessarily whether or not I made good technical decisions. It was going to be dependent on whether or not they brought it to market correctly, because it wasn't like a new feature for an application they already had. It was a new thing that then they were going to be responsible for bringing in users and growing the base. And there, it's like, if I go value-based, I'm effectively saying I want to tie myself to whether you do a good job on your side of this, marketing and growing this company. And the reason why I operate as a contractor and not someone who took equity in the company, because that's effectively what you're doing there, is because I didn't want that. I wanted to make money for what I did. If they failed, at least they knew they didn't fail because it was technically unsound. And if they succeeded, that's great. All the risk was on them. None of it was on me.
That's an interesting point that by going hourly, you're basically having a limited liability by your pricing model. I'm curious what maybe Keith, your thoughts are on that thought. Maybe having a limited liability in your contract instead of the pricing model, or what is your thoughts on that?
Well, hopefully the contract's set up pretty well in terms of, you're right, incorporation and stuff like that in terms of liability. In terms of the distribution of risk that Tim was talking about, I think that's great, because you're right. If you are helping somebody broach an entirely new market or in a new product line or a new segment or whatever, there's so many variables there, it's hard to get a handle on them. So I totally agree with that. In that case, when it is more exploratory, maybe time-based pricing makes more sense because it's an exploration process. It's an experimentation process. But one of my client smells is actually too many people sitting in the room. So when you do have meetings, if there's 1 or 2 people on their side, you've got a pretty clear idea of who's making decisions, who has the authority, stuff like that. When there's 8 or 9, or I've been in rooms with 12 people, it's always somebody else's decision, because odds are not only some of those people aren't in authority to make the decision, and some people will always defer to somebody else and not consistently the same somebody else. So getting anything done is impossible, and any conversation turns into a 30 or 40 or 50 thread discussion. I see Tim smiling over there. Tim's been there, hasn't he?
Yeah, don't work for them.
Yeah. If you get 10 people on the invite, you should immediately red flag there. 2 to 3 is kind of the sweet spot.
One is really sweet.
Yeah.
I always like if people mention other vendors, right? For me, it's just professional courtesy that it's like, you know what, like, are you trying to make me feel like I'm being compared or, whatever right now? My job would always be to make them as irrelevant as quickly as I could and just reposition my services as different, and therefore you can't compare me to anybody else. But I just didn't like that. That's not a good, sort of cultural, never feel good if people are just bringing that up. Well, these people said that. Well, I don't care.
Yeah, can I explore that for a second there? Where you said you tried to position yourself so you were your services were different, and they couldn't get that anywhere else. One of the points I make, some of the talks I get on being a contract developer, is that when you're selling yourself, literally as the commodity, as the thing, and you can't get me anywhere else. But to me, that seems to fly a little bit in the face of value-based pricing, because value-based pricing is saying we're going to agree that there's going to be an outcome, and this is what it's worth. Now, if someone else can give you that outcome, you should just go with them, or you should just compare apples to apples, because we're talking about billing off of the outcome versus where I would argue is you're going to get a much better experience working with me. That's why you're paying me, not for necessarily the outcome, but you're paying me for my time, because that outcome may change, it can vary, but you're working with a professional and you're working with a set of skills that you can't get anywhere else. It just seems like as soon as you reduce it to value, you go to something that can very much be shopped around.
No, I don't think so, because there's so much baked into that. It's hard to pick it apart in that way. If you say this is 20 hours, this is my cost, or this is how much my rate is, this is how much it's going to cost, then you have to be very meticulous in sort of what you do there. Even if you don't turn over that detailed estimate, it requires a level of precision that the customer's probably going to see or figure out or something at some point. It's easier to shop. If it's value-based, somebody comes to me and says, I need this. Well, I've got a lot of understanding and background and connections and information that the next guy isn't going to have. So I think value-based pricing actually becomes easier in that way, because they don't know all the variables that went into that.
Yeah, I think when you're doing value-based, is you spend the time with the client up front, and by the time you're done and you actually hand them a quote, like they're already sold, or they're darn clear, because you've been able to demonstrate how different you are, right? And even like what you're really selling is, I'm going to come at this problem differently, even if the prices are the same. And you know what? If you don't like my approach to how I'm going to come at this problem, it's just as well that we didn't start together. So I guess I'm kind of I'm with Keith on it being I think it's actually more likely that they'll be different. But I'll also say, the example of ours given there is like, you are distinguishing yourself in a way, right? Like you're saying, hey, these are all the reasons I'm different. And, I think ultimately that's the first job of anybody who's selling themselves.
I'd love to explore the idea of how important a niche is to have when you're exploring value-based pricing. And because we're talking about like you're trying to sell maybe a product, and like we're spending a lot of time on this kind of discovery process with the client. If you already have a discovery process in place with this niche that you've developed over the years, is that how important does that play into value-based pricing? Is that kind of like one of the crucial pillars of value-based?
Well, I've been in competitions with other contractors and stuff before, and there is nothing more compelling and more devastating in a proposal than when they submit a proposal and they cite your website or your work in their proposal. So if you've got a niche and you can talk about it and you can demonstrate that you've got that niche to the point where your competitors are referencing you, you win.
Yeah, I'll just go one further and say the way that I've seen it play out in value-based is it's like any domain. Like pick like a PHP as a programming language. If you spend more time in it, you know it better, you get the answers faster. And so ultimately, if your client's trying to solve a problem, chances are it's actually less about the technology choice. We may choose to use PHP, but let's say you specialize in travel sites, like you're building travel production applications, and you've dealt with the back-end providers that serve up content in those areas. I don't know, I'm getting too specific, but the idea is, like, if you have familiarity with the problem space and the domain, like you are sort of more valuable because you're going to save them time, you're going to de-risk efforts. And so I think what happens is if you build up time in a niche, if you spend it in there, you start to acquire this expertise that makes you more efficient, lower risk. And those are things that your client wants to buy, right? Like,
and that's true regardless of your pricing structure, though. As an individual contractor, like one of the pieces of advice I'd give to people who were bidding on projects is to explain as much as possible how you're going to do it. There tends to be this bias towards saying, kind of keeping it closed, so they don't know until they hire you, and then reveal how it's going to be built or how you're going to put it together. The flip side is if you just explain, hey, I understand the problem, I understand how I'm going to solve it, here's how. Your proposal becomes, like this echoes what Keith was saying, your proposal becomes the proposal that they then stack all the rest of them up to. And when they're going back to talk to, say, the other contractor, they start referencing some of the things that you bring up. Well, would you use this? Or is this, is this a problem we'll run into? Because you isolated those, you listed those, you gave them things to think about. So there's a trend towards wanting to just be called a developer now and not a something developer. But I think as anyone who's working, either, whether you're a contractor, whether you're a small shop, knowing your problem domain makes you very valuable.
Well, and the thing that I threw out in that Sammy threw out in my intro is I am a problem solver. That's what I do. I do my best to solve more problems than I start, but the better understanding depth I can get towards that, the better off you are. And it's not just stacking the proposals side by side to say this is the baseline now. It's about when you've gone through that discovery process that Mike was talking about earlier, it's stacking you against this other person. And this other person, their entire interaction might have been via email and phone. Whereas if you sometimes just sit down with the customer saying, oh yeah, we talked about this. Even if it's not in the proposal, we talked about this. They demonstrated a higher understanding of this. All those things count in your favor.
Yeah, I think selling services, which is ultimately kind of what we're talking about, a lot of it is time and comfort with one another. So yeah, that discovery phase is like, you don't do that by email. You sit down and you roll up your sleeves and you hit a whiteboard and say, please answer these questions for me so I can give you the best proposal I possibly can so you can make the best decision you possibly can. Like that's all time building the relationship. Again, if you just look at it like a process, you can do that whether you're billing for time or billing for value. I think, ultimately, chances are, opinion mine, you're leaving money on the table when you bill by the hour, and you're pitting yourself against your client. And so for those two reasons, plus a whole bunch of others I could throw out there, I'm much more a fan of trying to focus on value.
Is there any sort of crossover, or maybe this, if we have a Venn diagram of value-based and hourly pricing, are there moments where you can see a little bit of a crossover there in the middle of that Venn diagram, where you're kind of using hours as your currency for a value-based kind of model, to where it's like you're like, I'm factoring in the hours it's going to take me to do this, but it's the plus all the communication that I know I'm going to have to deal with, but also factoring in my expertise as I'm really efficient at this. You're almost just using it as a currency as opposed to just actual literal hours. Have any of you run into that?
Like a numeric unit to figure out how to price your project? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, I mean, you're still putting down the word hours, but it's not literally like how many hours you're spending on it, but it's sort of like you're still valuing the project based on a currency that's arbitrary.
Well, I can dive in there and just say no. The only thing that matters to me is trying to figure out, well, how much is this project worth to you? And what can I reasonably charge, and what other things might matter to you. So, hey, this is the impact of this project, right? Okay, good. So I understand that. So this is worth $1 million to your business. And by the way, if it gets done in the next 2 weeks, it's worth, $3 million or something like just understanding the lay of the land, and then, trying to determine like what the right price is based on that information for me to, charge. And again, so divorced by hours. I want to make sure that I can do the project profitably. And I want to ensure that, people, are going to choose me, or I can live with it if they don't. But I would steer very far away from what you're talking about. What I do have done sometimes in proposals that are value-based are say, hey, everything you asked for is $110,000, but that's made up of 7 component parts, ranging from $2,000 to $10,000 in value. And here's a menu of all these things. And then if you want to make the price of the project less, you can take those things out, but just know that you're not going to get that value. And then that puts the power in the hands of the client again to say, well, geez, I really want that, so I guess I better spend 100 grand or whatever it is.
Because what Sammy, what you're describing is effectively fixed base billing, which is the flip side of value. Well, essentially you're saying, what is this project based on what I believe I'm going to spend, the effort I'm going to put into it? What is it valued to me, not to the client? And, that's where I would never go, when I was contracting, because that can change. The amount of effort I have to put into it can change very quickly.
Especially if the customer on the other side, if they shift roles, responsibilities, if suddenly the person that you're communicating with has emergencies come up and timelines are delayed, or invoices are late, or anything along those lines, suddenly it gets to be a lot more painful, and the value to you goes down very quickly. That's why having the understanding of their value is vitally important.
I want to bring back something up that Mike brought up about presenting kind of a menu of stuff to the client to kind of select for, because we do work in a real world and there are real world budgets and all that. So if you were to be presented with the idea of, okay, here's these all the features that we've been talking about, they're kind of broken down into an itemized list. We can pick and choose to fit these within your budget. What are your thoughts on doing that versus maybe doing that and adding maybe a discount to the client? Do you ever give discounts, or do you feel like that sort of undermines the idea behind value-based pricing?
I think discounting yourself and being valuable are at odds with each other. Full stop.
I have done discounts a couple times, normally tied to like projects that I believe in. Like if this is for like the Red Cross, maybe something like that. Or I've done it once or twice for if they pay like net 10 or net 15 as opposed to net 30 just for cash flow. But those are one-off things, and I think I can count the times I've done that on one hand in 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said when approaching that the problem with discounting something is your client's going to think that they just got wholesale and everybody else has to pay retail. And they're going to assume that they're getting the same exact product, ignoring the fact that you may be discounting it for them as a favor. Would approach with things like to be something, I have some emotional tie to. I would much rather just do it for free and tell them, hey, I'm going to do it for free. If you want to pay me something, that's fine. Pay me what you think it's worth. That means when I end up not being able to finish it or not being able to do it, or some paying client comes along and I have to prefer them first, they can't shake their fist at me and say, but we gave you money. So that's just, I would rather give it to somebody for free than I would discount, my rate.
Oh, I did have a friend starting off about the same time as me, probably 10, 15 years ago, that was giving a discount rate to like friends and family, and people started accepting that as the base rate. So when he'd get referrals, they would say, oh, so-and-so said you were charging this much. I'm a friend too. Can I get that? And it ends up like right off the bat, you're having a discussion that's painful, and there's no way to win, frankly.
True that. I'm curious if value-based pricing fits in the model of a SaaS, like a software as a service. Is there any way that could fit, or is that literally just completely separate?
Well, I'm a customer of this company called FreshBooks, and I'm very, very happy with what they do. In fact, when I had to change between plans and they didn't really have a thing that fit me correctly, I emailed support and they're like, oh, we've got this thing that we don't document here. And I'm like, oh, that's exactly what I needed. And then I switched back to a normal plan after like 3 months. So yes, I think value-based makes a hell of a lot of sense there.
Yeah, my perspective is that a lot of menu-based pricing, like where you have this tier, this tier, this tier, this tier, are in some effects value-based pricing, because the companies that come along and say, well, I can certainly pay X amount of dollars per month. I want the extra features that I may never use, but I want to feel like I got everything that I wanted. And that's true of whether it's software as a service. That's true of Microsoft server licensing. No one probably uses the features on the super whatever Windows Server 2087. They just feel like, oh, if we can afford it, we're going to buy the best one because we want it there when we need it. And they're able to grab the people at the bottom of the scale that still want the server, but for them, it doesn't have the same value because they'll buy the bare bones version and make it work.
Yeah. So I think the way it lives for SaaS companies is in how you communicate the value of your price. And frankly, it's something I wish we did better, but it's, I've seen it done as like, for a cup of coffee every day, Starbucks cup of coffee every day, like you can save, 4 hours this month or something like that. Right. So it's like, oh, instead of having a cup of coffee for $2 a day, it should be $40 a month. I can save like 4 hours. Wow. That's, if I bill at $80 an hour, like that's totally worth it. Right. So I'm not sure I did the best job of explaining that, but I think that's how. And also, by the way, when you say SaaS, I'd love to dig into that a little further. I think there are certainly like enterprise SaaS companies that you build an application, you're selling it into an enterprise, and there's some actual salespeople involved with selling that. You're gonna start to get into the value conversation pretty quickly. Like, hey, what problem are you trying to solve? Like, how many people are involved with that? And kind of get into a world where it's like, we're going to save you 100 hours a month. Surely you're going to spend $1,000 a month with us.
That's awesome. That's inspiring. It's like, hey, and ways to incorporate this into the SaaS idea that I've been wanting to do, right? I wanted to see, so I guess this sort of answers that next question that I had is about how value-based pricing fits into a kind of a recurring income stream that's sort of consistent, not just project to project, but if you have a SaaS, you kind of have maybe some sort of recurring income stream. Is there other ways that you can use a recurring income stream within the context of value-based pricing?
I'll just jump on the grenade first here. Sorry, these things come to me. But so here's what I would say is, again, value in your client's eye, right? Like you may find that, for example, you build a website for a client and their concern is just, I'm going to need help sometimes. I'm afraid of how much that's going to be. So you might say, listen, for $500 a month, we'll maintain, like these kinds of things on your site. And it's like a retainer. And, I'll wager that, 1 month out of 12, they'll actually use kind of $500 of your time. So you basically have this very profitable stream of recurring revenue coming through to you after you've delivered a project already. That gives them comfort because they know they can call you and that you're going to be available, and also provides you with like a recurring element to your income. Does that make sense? So, but I guess it goes back to, hey, why would I consider it value-based? It's because, well, the client has a concern that can be helped by you being on like an ongoing monthly retainer. That make sense?
Yeah, and as much as a proponent of hourly-based pricing, I am, at least in the context of this conversation, I have done things like retainers in the past, understanding that, yeah, effectively I'm just satisfying the concern of my clients. They certainly don't use it as much as it's there, but it's worth it for them to pay the whatever dollars a month it is to know they have someone on call. And I've even approached clients and said, basically the conversation boiled down to, although it took an hourly nature to it, but it basically boils down to, what's the value of having Tim come in every month for 2 hours and looking at your code base and telling you what to change about it? Now, we put an hourly dollar on it because we're talking about a fixed amount of time, but it wasn't necessarily my hourly rate. It's what's the value for them to have someone come into the office for a day, a couple hours, take a look at the code. Where does that fit in their budget? And how valuable is that to them to have someone come in?
Yeah, I've got nothing to add. They nailed it.
You need to clip that someplace. Keith Casey had nothing to add.
So if you wanted to transition an existing client from that you already have an hourly kind of base model going, do you have any tips for transitioning that to a value-based model with that client?
I personally, I would do it in I might approach it in stages. I haven't done it with anyone, so just in terms of that disclosure, I would probably do it in stages of terms of start with the hourly that you have, start going to like a half day or a daily billing rate, figure out that sort of thing. As you get some more confidence and more comfortable with the size and the scope of the challenge that you're solving, start figuring out how to have that conversation. Start shifting it to Maybe it's basically an approach for a retainer, to be able to say, we will dedicate this sort of things to what you're working on, with these milestones, and start steadily breaking away from the hourly and just work towards milestones instead. I haven't done it personally though, so I couldn't tell if it works or not.
I'll echo Keith's disclaimer on not having done it personally, but like some of those, some of kind of the picture I paint of those startup type projects that I think work very well for me on the hourly side of things. Once established, they have users that are asking for features. That's a perfect time to say, all right, let's not talk about hours. Don't let me propose it that way. You've got people that are paying you money for this product. When you turn on this feature, what's that worth to you? Tell me, let's figure that out. And like what we were talking about before, what Mike said about how quickly do you want to get it there? And let's price it according to that. Because at that point, then they do have a way to account for it as a value, because they're bringing customers on board. Customers are making demands. They understand how they're making money. I think if you have a client that starts out not with a fuzzy idea about what they want, but with an unknown idea that hasn't been accepted by the market, then, as it's established, that's a good point to transition to value-based pricing.
Tim, we're going to convert you yet. That's sounds like we might have just done it there. That was awesome.
No, I mean, I understand where it works. I just, I had a very, say, niche set of clients in the past that I tended to work for.
Yeah. So that transitioning thing's hard. I'll just chip in. I think that the phased approach is the way to go. What I might say is, hey, start with net new clients, right? Because they won't have a concept of how you did it before, and kind of like work on it a little bit. And then for your existing clients, if you don't have the clear-cut opportunity that Tim just mentioned there with now we've got features and think about it that way, I might do something like say, hey, there's a discrete project coming up on the horizon. And hey, let's approach this a little differently, and we're gonna price it a little differently. We're working, so kind of inch your way into it, but use it with like a new project. Do not try and do it like mid-project. Bad idea. Finish whatever you're doing, and then maybe there's a new opportunity that comes up down the road.
And for people that do a lot of hourly work, that same principle is the same thing you apply to changing your rate, which is change it on new clients first, and then you have a set of clients, and then you can go back to your old clients and say, hey, I have to deprioritize your work because I have other clients that are paying far more. It's the same, some of the same processes you can apply to that as well.
Quick question for you, Tim. When you're doing contracting full time, were you primarily with a handful of customers for long term, or was it more of projects for a relatively set expected duration?
Right, a little bit of both. So I have some clients that I work for on and off, building their stuff for years, right? And then I'd have other smaller projects that would just take maybe a month or two to get up and running and then out the door. And I'd run them concurrently. So I never, the way I contracted, I never had a project that took up all my time because I always wanted to make sure I could switch when there was a delay to something else.
Right.
One kind of final thought to throw out there before we start wrapping up. I wanted to see, I've been nerding out on legacy databases recently, mainly because I gave a talk about it at ZenCon recently, and I just sort of I've just been in legacy database mode with client work. If someone were to hand you a legacy database, or I'm sorry, a legacy application, and they were saying, hey, I need this to be refactored, I need new features added, I need new bugs, I need bugs fixed, where does the value-based pricing model fit into that situation?
I think it's actually relatively easy there in a lot of ways, because you can go to their existing users and figure out what are the pains. Is this for lack of a better definition, an invoicing app that invoices disappear? Is this a billing app where things are missing? Is this a payment app where things are dropped or whatever? Is this something that people spend a lot of their day in? If this is something that they open up for 20 minutes at the end of the week to log their hours and then they close it, it's any value-based stuff is going to be very hard there, unless those hours then go into bigger reports or something. If this is something that somebody spends day in, day out, like every single day in, 5 or 6 hours a day, that really drives their work and their team, I think a value-based approach is much better because they feel the pain.
Yeah, I might go something like, okay, you have a legacy application. You got two paths. One is building a whole new application, which takes 7 people a year, costs you $1 million. Another thing is that we help you not do that, right? Because it doesn't suit your budget or what have you. So you're going to be maintaining this one for the next 5 years at $200,000 a year, right? Something like that. So just to frame the conversation a little bit of like, here are your business problems, right? Build a whole new application, fraught with risk and peril, going to take a bunch of time. You've decided to maintain it, and then if we're going to help you maintain it, here's all the ways we've done that before, because that's part of our niche and we have experience. Here are some of the pitfalls you'd expect. Like, we got to learn however you built that last time. By the way, we really need a sandbox set up, because if we break something and there aren't enough tests, like, that could be detrimental to you'd start to demonstrate some of your know-how and say, for all these reasons, you're going to want to pay us this to make your life so you can sleep at night, that kind of thing.
Good advice. I hope this conversation has inspired some of you to maybe dabble down the path of value-based pricing, and I'd love to hear some feedback of anybody who's kind of trying that path out. If you're sitting here just taking notes on these ideas, put it in Markdown and then send it to github.com/phproundtable. There's a repo there called show-notes. I have a note here to give a shout out to Chris Shaw for submitting the show notes for episode 53, which was a while back ago, but the episode of Why I'm Afraid to admit that I use PHP. And I had since this episode, the hourly versus value-based pricing episode, was supposed to happen basically right after that one. That was when I was going to give him the shout out. So Chris, sorry, I didn't give you a shout out until just now, but thank you for contributing those show notes. And if you do contribute show notes, I'll give you a personal shout out right here on the live episode, and I'll link to your Twitter in the actual website itself. And since we're kind of wrapping up, we're going to wrap up with my favorite segment, the developer shout out, which is the segment that recognizes a developer for being awesome in the community. And what we do is we send this developer a $50 Amazon gift card sponsored by Laracast.com, which is the de facto website for learning things about Laravel, but lots of other PHP related stuff and IDEs and how to test and all these things, just sitting there watching videos and learning at the same time. So thank you, Laracast, for sponsoring the developer shout out for so long. 100% of the money that Laracast submits for this goes straight to the developers. And for this episode, I asked the panel to nominate somebody to receive the developer shout out, and they nominated Patrick McKenzie. So, Mr. Keith, why did you guys nominate Patrick?
So Patrick McKenzie, or as other people might know him, Patio11 on Hacker News and Twitter, is a huge advocate of value-based pricing and really sort of getting developers in general to understand what their work is actually valued at, like how they fit into the business, how their work furthers business goals. And I think he's just been a great example of that for at least the 5 or 6 years that I've known him. So happy to give him a shout out there.
Wonderful human being. Met him myself. Doubling down on that reco.
Excellent. So well deserved. Thank you so much, Patrick, for your contributions. I will be reaching out to you to get your snail mail address and getting this $50 Amazon gift card to you and a giant PHP Roundtable sticker that's as big as your face. So you can stick it on all the things to cover up the things that you don't want to see. Like on the back of your computer, I recommend just putting it as the base sticker, and then you can put other stickers on top of it if you like. But I still have trouble giving out to people at conferences. Some of them, they're like, don't give me that sticker. It's too big. I can't put it anywhere. So I'm going to get smaller stickers next time. I'm almost out of these bigger ones. I almost handed them all out. So this basically takes us to the very end where we do some shameless plugging. Mr. Mike, do you have anything that you would like to shamelessly promote?
Here's what I'll say. If you need a ridiculously easy way to invoice your clients and kind of get ready for tax time with your accounting and such, please check out FreshBooks. Super easy to use, designed for self-employed professionals and their teams. I built it for myself when I was out doing contracting, and hope you like it.
Absolutely. I've used FreshBooks for years, and then one of the business episodes that we did quite a few episodes ago, we had all the developers that were on that episode all used FreshBooks for their invoicing and stuff like that. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And Keith, do you have anything that you want to promote?
Other than FreshBooks, yes. Though I've been a happy paying customer for at least 4 or 5 years now. So I work and live and breathe API design, API usage, all that stuff. So definitely check out my book, theapidesignbook.com. I heard that there are others, but really, who has a better domain name than that? theapidesignbook.com.
Awesome. What about you, Tim? You have anything you want to shamelessly plug?
Just, I mean, if you're the PHP community, I'll be at the next booth at PHP World next week, and also live streaming all the keynotes. So definitely run over to PHP Architect's account or follow at Nexmo on Twitter, and we'll make sure that we tweet out the live links when the keynotes from World start.
This man has amazing slides in his talk. Epic,
And I have
epic
amazing slides in my talks. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us in this episode. Our next episode is coming up kind of soon. We're talking about logging and crash reporting in PHP and setting up elk stacks and all this kind of fun stuff. That one is scheduled for November 14th, which is next Monday. You might be wondering why, wow, we have like 4 episodes that are scheduled right here at the beginning of November. That was due to all the crazy scheduling conflicts that we were having with some of these. Actually, it's funny, Mike, when you sent me on Twitter, you sent me your email address. It was like your email address at FB, and I was, for some reason, because I'm a Facebook app developer, I interpret that as fb.com, which is Facebook's email stuff. And that was one of the original things where I sent an email to you, and I was like, I don't think you ever got my email. And then I was like, oh, no, FB meant FreshBooks. And I'm like, oh, of course I meant FreshBooks.
The real FB. Everybody knows that. Come on.
Right, the real FB. So, but anyway, we have logging and crash reporting coming up next Monday. And then in December, after all this, I'm kind of front-loading November because me and my dance partner are getting ready for the biggest dance competition of our lives at the end of November during Thanksgiving weekend. We're debuting our routine. We didn't mean to do that, but it just ended up that way with practice and stuff. But we're debuting it at the biggest competition of the year. Bad idea for anybody who wants to get into competitive dancing. Don't stress yourself out like that. But we're in that situation, though. So PHP Roundtable is going to be picking back up in December. We're going to be talking about PHP 7.1, which will be released by then, hopefully. Cross fingers. Yes, it should be. And PHP Fig 3.0. The Fig has been remodeled, and it's 3.0. And we're going to be talking about some Figgy members to figure out what's going on. I'd like to thank Mike and Keith and Tim for joining us in this discussion, and we'll see folks in the next episode.
Thanks, Sammy.
Yep. See you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.